This is the My Campaign Coach podcast, where we talk about how to win elections. Every week, we let you hear straight from the best consultants, operatives, and candidates in the game, all for one reason, to help you win. For more information about how we can help you win, visit mycampaigncoach.com. Now, here's your host, Raj Schaefer.
Welcome to the My Campaign Coach podcast. Today we're talking to Representative Matt Krause of Texas 93rd District about how he got started as a candidate and the lessons he has learned through both defeat and victory. Matt's a fourth-generation Texan and has just been reelected to his third term in the Texas State House. He's a graduate of the San Diego Christian College, where he was a star athlete and earned some recognition from ESPN magazine. Following college, Matt was in the inaugural class at Liberty University School of Law. His resume since then is extensive, and I'll link to a more full form of it in the show notes. The most important things to know about Matt are that he's a Christian, he's been married to his bride Jenny for 14 years, and is dad to 5 incredible kids. He's also a dedicated conservative voice in Austin. Matt's been a friend of mine for 7 years, and we first met when he came through a candidate training event that Drew Ryan and I did back in 2009, which has been a really long time. He's experienced significantly more wins than losses, but has plenty to share with us from what he's learned from both. Matt is the first elected official we've had on the podcast, and he has some awesome personal insights to share about how you can prepare to run and execute a winning campaign. With that, Representative, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. I can't believe it's been 7 years. That's hard to believe.
Gosh. Yeah, it's I feel like we're both getting old here. But it's been a pretty awesome 7 years. Now, tell me a little bit more about how you got involved in politics and what you're doing now and how you kind of got started in this crazy world.
Yeah, I'd always kind of had a passion for the founding fathers, for the Constitution, for law, politics. And so I always kind of thought maybe that's the direction I should go. It's really the only reason I went to law school, because I felt like, most politicians seem like they're lawyers. So I went to law school, came back to Texas in 2007 and ran the constitutional litigation firm for a group called Liberty Counsel. And Barack Obama ran for president, and he kept talking about fundamentally transforming America. And I happened to like what America was built upon and its principles and values. And so I thought now's the time to get involved. And through a series of events, I came to meet our mutual friend Drew Ryan, and we had breakfast together one day. And so we were talking about it. And at the time, I thought about running for Congress. I thought that's where we should go. That's where we needed to turn back the country after Obama was elected. But he encouraged me to look at the state legislature. And so I looked at my representative, found that we had some different philosophical beliefs and would have different voting records. So thanks to Drew's encouragement and the training that I received from you, and he during that time, I thought, you know what, I should give the state legislative thing a chance.
Well, this comes up a lot as I've been training folks, because you're just the perfect example of that. A couple of the pieces of advice that Drew and that I gave you at that point, and that I tell pretty much everybody is, okay, you got to be ready for two things. One, you got to be ready to lose. And two, you got to be ready to run a second time, because that first time, and we'll talk about it a little bit later on, but there's just so many challenges in that first case, that first race you run, and your ability to use the time between when you lose and when you go around the second time to improve yourself, to build your name ID. That has just so much potential, and you're the perfect example of how you run that right. So going off of that, tell us a little bit more about that first race against Charlie and the lessons you learned from losing that race. How did it go? What were you happy with, and what did you learn from that?
Yeah, it sounds kind of cliche, but one of the greatest things about living in the country and the state that we do is that if you want to run for office, you can. I mean, nobody encouraged me to run. Nobody in the political structure asked me to run. Nobody thought I had any reason to run, but I felt like I could offer a legitimate alternative to the incumbent in office at the time, and was willing to put in the work. And so one of the neat things about knocking on 7,000 doors during that stretch of the campaign was that I got to talk to a lot of great people, and they reinforced the fact that, what I believe resonates a lot with what they believe. And so that was one of my favorite parts, just getting out there and meeting folks and becoming part of the political community in House District at that time, 99. So I really enjoyed that, the interaction with the people. Some of the lessons I learned was, if you're going to take on an incumbent, especially a well-established incumbent, you've got to start early, and you really need some money. We only spent about $19,000 for the entire race, running against one of the most well-funded and powerful representatives in the Texas House. And one of the things that pleased me the most at the end of the election was that we got 42.5% of the vote, which I think surprised a lot of people. And
yeah, it did.
Probably maybe high 20s, maybe low 30s, but I don't think a lot of people were thinking we were going to crack 40% at all. And so that, again, was encouraging and exciting to know that, you know what, our message really did resonate. Maybe if we had started a little earlier and had a little more money to spend on that message, then we could have even made a bigger dent in that gap. But learned a lot of valuable lessons, but nothing beats knocking on doors, going house to house, putting yourself out there, introducing yourself to people, and just working as hard as you can. That's the best campaign strategy out there, and I know that's something that you hit on a lot in all of your training.
Yeah, you just hit on two things that we constantly harp on, and that's one, knocking on doors, getting out there and building your relationship person to person. Actually communicate with folks about what you believe, why you're running, and why they should actually get out and vote for you. And the second one is that you got to raise money. It sucks, and I know you don't like raising money or asking people for money. I hate it. But the fact is, as Drew always says, it's a mother's milk of politics. And whether you need a lot or a little, you still need some. And that's one of those tough lessons to look back on. Be like, man, if we'd have just had some more money, and I know in your case it wasn't for lack of trying, but if we'd just had a little bit more money, what could we have done? Could we have beat that guy that time around? And the fact is that, we can't do anything different than we did back then. But it's important that the listeners really know, especially just hearing from you, that's a critical step. And you've definitely worked hard since then on both fronts. You haven't let either of those slide in any of your successive races. It's been about building those relationships person to person and raising money that helps you be able to carry that as an evangelist, those conservative principles, and help work for them in Austin.
That's right. And for those listeners out there, you don't have to raise dollar for dollar what the incumbent does. And so that's where people like Raz can help get you a realistic budget, where your consultants can tell you, here's what you need to spend, the minimum amount that you need to spend to get your message out there. So don't feel like you have to match dollar for dollar what your opponent does, because if you have a good ground game, if you have a lot of grassroots activity, that can shorten that gap with the money gap. But so you don't have to do dollar for dollar, but you have to have enough money to get your message out there. Or if people out there agree with you, they won't know about you enough or have heard about you before election day to know that they agree with you and should vote with you.
Yeah, you could be the best candidate. You can have the greatest message, be the most conservative guy out there that resonates 100% with your district. But if people don't know you're there, they can't vote for you.
That's exactly right.
If you're not knocking on the doors and raising the money to pay for the advertising and the media to get out there to them, they're not going to vote for you because they don't know who the heck you are.
That's right.
So what did you do? Because you weren't just idle. We talked shortly after you lost that first race, and you're like, "Yep, I'm going to run again. I want to keep fighting." What did you do during the interim between 2010 losing that race and 2012 with winning and just sweeping the field?
Yeah, and if you remember at that time where we got together and talked, I mean, we didn't know what was going to happen with the maps. We didn't know what district I was going to end up in. So we had to prepare for a lot of different scenarios. But as you encouraged me to do, I started getting a lot more active just in the party, in the local party, the county party. Started going to more events, started going to more functions, just so your name is kind of out there and people know who you are. In 2010, I started out with literally 0% name ID. And so you kind of have to be a part of that structure. You don't have to toe the party line, but you do need to be involved in the major party that you are running for office in. So as you encouraged me and others encouraged me, I got involved more in the party apparatus and structure here in the county that I was running, and also continue to take notes on who I might run against or who I might look to challenge, because maybe they had some bad votes, maybe they upset some people, and you could talk to them to see if they would consider helping you. And so I just continued to make contacts and build relationships for those people who might be influential or help should we run another race. And so as you encouraged me, and as a lot of people think, as you said, think about this as a 2-cycle run, because that way you won't get so discouraged if you do lose on election day. This is all part of the process. And if you start from that next day, basically running for that next time, you're going to be so much more situated and so better positioned to do what you want to do.
Now, there's no doubt about it. This is exactly this is part of why I wanted to have you on as our first elected official on the podcast or candidate, was that your story in this aspect, not being discouraged, but picking yourself back up and saying, look, this is about the principles. And so the principles did not get defeated. This is about a campaign and knowing you started from 0 money, 0 name ID, 0 experience, 0 team. And when you're starting from those kind of odds, it's tough. Now, we also know people that have won on their first run, and that's awesome. That's what we shoot for. We don't plan to lose. But the fact is that your chances of winning on a second time go up a lot if you use that time in the interim. So if you do lose, you just got to know to keep fighting, because I've seen a lot of great candidates that could have won their second time around, I think, they get discouraged and they drop out and they just kind of lose track of them. And it breaks my heart because they're people that had so much to offer the movement and their potential constituencies. And I'm really glad you stuck around. Yeah. Now, let's go on to talking, because we talked about the losing part, but I want to talk about the winning part because that's my favorite part. In 2012, you took on a former incumbent. She got cut. She was in a new district as well, but she's an incumbent, and there were multiple people in the race. And in Texas, in order to avoid a runoff election, you have to get over 50% of the votes. And so that's, especially as a previously failed candidate running again against an incumbent in a new district, that's a tough. I mean, that's not an easy thing to do. That was a tough challenge, but you took it on and you ended up sweeping the table. You won on the primary night. There was no runoff. Tell us about how you applied what you learned in your first campaign to that, and let's talk about the winning side, how you won. Yeah,
absolutely. Again, the biggest 2 lessons I think I learned the first time were start earlier and raise more money. So that meeting that you and I had after the 2010 defeat was within days, it seems like weeks, of that first loss. And so from then on, I was just working. So we definitely got started a lot earlier. And so even though we didn't know exactly where the maps were going to end up, I started working a lot in the area that I knew for sure that I was going to be running no matter what. And so then when the lines did get drawn, I found myself having parts of Arlington, a city I'd never run in before. I could focus a lot of time, effort, and energy on there because I'd already done so much work earlier up in the North Fort Worth part where I knew I was going to keep. So again, we just worked hard. We didn't change anything on our door-to-door strategy. We hit thousands of doors again with that same model. And again, there's no substitute for that, because you can get 10 mailers in the mail about a candidate, how horrible they are, how great they are. But if somebody stood at your doorway, talked to you, asked you what your concerns are, and shaken your hand, that is so much more effective and powerful than any kind of literature that you're going to receive in the mail. So we kept doing that. And then this time we raised, we had about $65,000 to spend, which is still on the low end. Again, you don't have to match them dollar for dollar. They spent 6 figures. We only spent $65,000, but we were able to get our message out this time. We had enough money to get our message out and let people know who we were. So having more money starting earlier was a winning combination for us, and we just worked relentlessly, had a great group of volunteers, and just were able to get across the finish line because it was a team effort with the tools we needed to succeed in place this time.
Well, I just remember still sitting on primary night in 2012 and watching those turns and just praying, okay, let's get over 50. Let's get over 50. Let's avoid that runoff. It was
a seesaw.
I know. Right. It was a nerve-wracking night. I had 0 fingernails left when that was over. But you came out with what, like 53, 54%, something like that?
It was like 50.4%.
Oh, it was closer than I remember.
We did a runoff by about 48 votes.
Oh, my gosh.
So every vote does count, and I was grateful for every single one of them.
Well, and there's not a doubt in my mind that the hard work you did on the ground was what won that. And you're exactly right that, especially as the candidate himself, the fact that you knocked that many doors, I mean, it's hard work. And in Texas, it's either really cold or really hot. And so it's never comfortable to get out there and block walk. But your ability to go out there, I mean, most people, if you ask them, what's your biggest pet peeve with elected officials, is that they don't listen. They don't care what you think. And there's that disconnect between the constituent and the elected. And you went out there and you proved to them by that direct communication that you cared, that you were listening. And the byproduct of that was they believed in you and believed that you would represent them. And so when you got to Austin, they had that faith in you. And tell us a little more about how you made that transition, because too many elected officials, they get elected and now they're all of a sudden the dog that caught the car and really trying to make that transition from candidate to elected official. Talk a little bit about how you managed that and what you kind of learned that you didn't know going into it about being an elected official in the state house.
Yeah, Jenny, my wife, my very supportive, beautiful, awesome, wonderful wife, and I talked shortly after that primary win, and we had a general election opponent, but we felt pretty good about it just because of how the district is. And we said, the biggest thing going into this session in January is that we never hold on to the title or position that we've just been elected to. That can't become our identity. That can't become our focus. And I think a lot of times people get down to Austin, in the case of Texas, or D.C. At the federal level, and it becomes their identity. And once it becomes your identity and who you are, then you'll try everything you can to hold on to that, which may mean compromising your principles or doing something you wouldn't have done. So we said we can't hold on to this office too tightly. And not only that, but we shouldn't be able to look back in a year or two and see that the State Representative Matt Krause was so much different than candidate Matt Krause. And so we wanted to be very consistent in our messages and how we applied that. And I got to tell you, if you're honest on the campaign trail, you really don't have much to be worried about when you get down to where you're going to govern, because people may not like it, people may not agree with you, but at least they know you're principled, because they say, why'd you vote that way? Well, it's because I told you that's what I was going to do on the campaign trail. So I found that if we were honest on the campaign trail, we could go down and vote accordingly, and people, even if they didn't like it, they respected it because you were consistent. But there were, you only campaign on about 3 or 4 big issues. Once you get in, especially to the Texas government, now the 10th largest economy in the world, should it be on its own, you've got a lot of different issues and things. So you had to get up to speed really quick on a lot of issues you never thought about or considered before. And so that was the biggest learning curve, I think, is going from just 3 or 4 main issues to now you're dealing with hundreds, and how are you going to make decisions on that? And that's where, if you don't have your principles embedded on who you are as a person and your philosophical beliefs, that's where I think a lot of elected officials go astray, because they're not tethered to those first principles.
You're exactly right. I've seen far too many people, some mutual friends of ours, or used to be mutual friends of ours, and colleagues of yours, have gone that path. They may have thought they were well anchored beforehand, but they got in there, and you could see them nearly immediately start to compromise. And they just didn't have themselves as well anchored as possible. And so that's why I think it's so important that people like yourself and our listeners that are considering a run for office know exactly what you believe, and that you have that accountability structure. In your case, you had both friends and Luke Macias as your consultant, and your bride especially, reminding you this is who you are. And she is there as a constant reminder and supporter to always keep you focused on that, because, you're awesome, but there definitely had to be times where you got tested, and thankfully you made the right call. And I have no doubt that your bride, as amazing as she is, had something to do with that.
No, you're exactly right. It was just the simple questions that she would ask. I would call her and say, okay, what about this? Should I go A or should I go B? And she would always bring me back. Okay, if you were running your campaign just 6 months ago, what would you have said? And usually that was pretty clarifying, because you can take a position really easily. So sometimes you get down into that bubble and black and white starts to become gray a little bit, and you make it more of an issue. And she was always good about bringing me back. Okay, what do you think the people in District 93 would want you to do? Even if that's different than what the people in Austin want you to do. And Luke Macias, as you said, my consultant, was always really good about that too. Not looking at it from a political angle, although sometimes that's important, but it's more from a principled angle. And you just vote that way and leave it to the voters to say yes or no the next election. But that shouldn't be your primary focus when you're making your decisions on the House floor, is what the political thing is. It's only what's the principled thing, and what did I tell my voters to get elected? Am I staying true to what I told them?
Now, one of the things that I always tell candidates, and I always ask anybody that I'm working with, is your spouse on board? Because yes. I simply won't work with people whose spouse isn't on board. I consider it to be one of those things that I'm not going to be part of destroying a marriage, and running a campaign, especially one that has a chance of losing when your wife's not on board or your husband's not on board, is going to do just that. Tell me a little bit more about kind of how you and Jenny worked through the process of you considering a run for office, and what role she's played in your political side of your life.
Yeah, and for the listeners out there, I can vouch for Raz's statement right there. It's one of the first questions we talked about the first time we got together after that training session. And so it is critically important, because I've seen so many good candidates who weren't able to finish a campaign strong because their spouse wasn't supportive. And it's hard to blame the spouse, because that candidate is gone all the time. There's so many demands on his or her time. But if they're not fully 100% supportive, by the time you really need to ramp up your effort and energy to cross the finish line, it's kind of become a drag. You're split between should I do this or not. There's so many issues at home that it kind of weighs on you, and you can't be the most effective candidate as possible. And Jenny and I, our faith plays a very important role in our lives. We believe God has a sovereign, providential plan for our lives, and we just want to discover it, whatever it is. And so we spent a lot of time praying about it before that first run. And so once we prayed about it, felt like this is what God had called us to do. We knew that no matter what it was, that we should continue on to the finish line. And so Jenny took that mentality. No matter how hard it was or how difficult it was, we knew we were called to it. And so that made it easier on both of us. But she is definitely the hero in our family. We have 5 kids, 9 and under. And so I couldn't do what I do if she wasn't taking care of everything at home and doing it in an incredible way. So I echo you, Raz. If your family can't be 100% supportive, and I'm not saying that's necessarily bad, maybe they need you at that point. But if they can't be 100% supportive, I would definitely be cautious about jumping into the arena, because it does take a toll on the family. And unless you're committed to it, it's going to be a tough ride.
Yeah, I like looking at them as a Christian, one of the best ways that God can speak to you and check your ego in those situations. But also, they're the first voters that you got to convince. they're going to be some of your core volunteers, donors, and voters. So if you can't convince them that you're supposed to run, this is the right time, this is the right job, this is the right, you're the right guy, then good luck with the rest of the folks, because the people that know you are the ones that should be the easiest.
That's right. Great point.
Now, a lot of our people, we got a lot of folks listening to this podcast that are considering running for office and that want to be your campaign staffers or volunteers. But there's the group that I'm really focused on at this moment is getting more conservatives to run for office, because we don't have enough people. There's not enough people challenging bad incumbents and liberals from the conservative side. Talk to us a little bit about why we need more conservatives to run and how we can help recruit our friends to run, or why we should run ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, you got to think there's all these elected positions around the country. Someone is going to fill that spot. So the question you ask yourself, who do you want filling that spot? Somebody who believes like I do, or somebody who believes the complete opposite of what I do? Because whoever gets into that spot, whether you like it or not, is going to have a little bit of more influence and ability to get the country, the state, the county, the city moving in the direction that they want to go. And so I think that's why it's imperative for conservatives to get involved, because we want conservatives in those seats to be pushing that agenda, to be pushing for those policies. And I think sometimes we think big, which is good. We ought to think big, but you don't need to run for president or the U.S. Senate or even Congress to make a difference. In fact, I know, Raz, I've heard this from you so many times. Local elections impact your life more than the federal elections do by an exponential amount. And so
Absolutely.
If you're a conservative out there who wants to get involved, don't worry about running for Congress. Think about running for your school board. Think about running for your city council. Think about running for your county commissioner's court, because that is where a lot of the progress is made towards conservative policies, or a lot of the damage is done by progressive policies, as we've seen in multiple cities and counties and states all over the country. So, again, I just think back to me in 2009 when Raz and I first met. I just wanted to get involved. So you can do that, and you can do that at a at a local level and have just as much impact than Barack Obama has now, or President Trump will have in a few weeks. You can have more influence over your community and the way your community goes than if you're on the school board or the city council.
Now, shifting over to once you're starting to think about it. So all these people that we've just convinced need to run, now that they're thinking about running, what do they need to do to help move from considering a run to actually launching their campaign and getting underway?
Yeah, I think you hit on it earlier when we were talking about the family, and you've got to convince those people first. So those people who you know in that district of wherever you're running, whether it's for a city council seat or a state representative seat or a school board seat, I would go to the people you know in that district and say, here's what I'm thinking about doing. What do you think? And if you approach 10 to 15 people and they all say, no, it's just not a good fit, or I don't think it's right, or I just think it's your family at where you are with your family, it's not the right thing to do. then I think that gives you a pretty clear message. But if you go to those people and they're like, you know what, that makes a lot of sense, or I think you'd be great in that position, or let us know what we can do to help, that gives you a little bit of confidence that, okay, this is what we need to do. And then I think you reach out to Raz, you reach out to somebody like Lucius, and you say, Raz, how can I get from point A to point B? And that's really what you're doing. And I think it's awesome, because I didn't have that kind of tool in 2009 until I heard about you and Drew and what you were doing. And so I would reach out to somebody who knows what it involves to run a campaign, and I would get with them and say, here's what I'm thinking about doing. Help me plot out a blueprint to get from A to Z. And then once you do that, it's realistic. You see that there is a path forward. You have some supportive people in your district. Then you just start knocking on doors. You start getting your message out there, and you start trying to raise money. So I would confirm it. I would pray about it. I would think about it. I would make sure your family's on board. Then I would talk to key people in the community. If they're still on board, I would start getting some quote unquote professional help from Raz or a consultant. Start plotting out your game plan. Know that you have a path to victory as you get started, and then just start working it, and don't worry about the results. It'll take care of themselves.
Well, I definitely appreciate the plug. That's exactly what we try to do here at My Campaign Coach. We want to help take people from considering a run for office and showing them how they got to build that plan to make their first round as profitable as possible. And I'll just add one thing. And when you're talking to those people and you're asking them for their support, whether it's during those initial conversations or down the line, there's a lot of people that are going to just pat you on the back and say, that's awesome, Matt. Way to go. You go get them.
Yeah.
And that's oftentimes quite hollow. But while you got them there and they've said, yes, they do like the idea of you running, say, okay, that's great. Well, I need you to do at least 2 of 3 things for me. That's endorse, volunteer, or donate. And can you do 2 of those things for me in the next week? And that's going to give you a really good gauge of how firmly they want to support you. And because those are the material ways they can help you out during those early phases of the campaign.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Get them active and engaged quick. That's another lesson we learned after the first campaign. As you said, we got a lot of people saying, go for it. You're great. You're doing it. Either those people weren't in the district and could actually vote for you, or that's all they would do is vote for you. We identified a lot more people who would do those 2 out of those 3 or 3 out of those 3 things in the second run. So I think that's a brilliant point.
Now, you already talked about your family a fair amount. How in the world do you balance being, working a job, being a father and a husband, as well as being a candidate and elected official, because you're fixing to go out of town for 140 days to Austin for the session?
Yeah, it's tough. Again, it's a calling. We've always had amazing amounts of respect for servicemen and women who are deployed and their families figure out how to make life work without them for long stretches of time. And our efforts are by no means equal to what they do, but we've taken a lot of inspiration from them. And so it's tough. I mean, you have to have an employer. My business partner's been great, who understands that you're going to be gone and that the benefits of you serving the community in this way outweigh the cons of not being there as much every other year. So you have to have an employer who's on board. So if you're thinking about running, clear it with your family first. And if they're on board, then I would talk to your employer and make sure that's something that they're on board with. So you have to have a supportive employer. And then you just have to make decisions. I mean, there's a lot of night events that I didn't go to, or that I only showed up for a little bit and then I got home to make sure I could tuck the kids in bed. So we don't plan anything on their birthdays as much as we can. We don't plan things on their birthday. We try to be home on the weekends. And one thing we always did was we took Sunday completely off. No phone calls, no door knocks, no fundraisers, no events, no meet and greets. That was just a day for worship and family, and having that one day to recharge completely. And we still do that. We don't do anything political on Sunday. Really helped us all kind of recalibrate at the end of a long week, get back together, recharge and re-energize, and we could all look forward to that day at the end of the week to make sure we were all together. So that's one big thing that we've done that I would encourage every candidate out there to do.
Well, one of the things I love about something Matt does for his kids is anytime that he and I meet in person, it's normally really early in the morning, and he always orders an extra, like a bucket full of pancakes to take home to the kids. So it's the little things that help make it worthwhile. As long as they know they love you and you still love them and you want to be with them, kids figure it out, and if your spouse is supportive. So it is tough, it's difficult, but all good things in life and great things in life and worth doing are difficult. So it'll cost you, it'll be some work, but it'll be worth it in the end. Now, when you're hiring staff for for your campaign or for your actual office as a state representative. Drew and I have talked about, and you know very well, that personnel is policy.
Absolutely.
How do you go about looking for those staff, and what do you look for in folks that you want to have work for you?
Yeah, as we talked about earlier, especially with Texas only having 140 days, you got to take care of hundreds of different issues in 140 days. So there's a lot of times where I'm very heavily reliant on my staff to give me, hey, is this good? Is this bad? What are the major points? What do I need to look for here? Is this something we should support or oppose? And so if you don't have somebody who's grounded philosophically in the principles that you believe, you could get off course really fast. As you said, personnel is policy. So I look for somebody, and there's different thoughts out there, but I look for somebody who I know is going to be on my same wavelength, that I know if a bill comes across my desk, we're both going to analyze it in the same way and think the same thing. We may not always agree on whether we should pursue this strategy or not, but philosophically we're on point. So I look for that. And then I look for somebody who's going to be a hard worker, a self-starter, and a team player. And if you're willing to get in there and work every day in the long hours, that is a huge benefit. If you can be a team player, because there's so many dynamics that goes on in the office, and you have to be willing, no one person can do it themselves. So if you can't be a team player, it's going to make it very difficult for you to function in our system. And so if you can do those things, and then if you're self-motivated, not always waiting to see, okay, how give me some work here or there, but proactively look for ways that you can help and benefit the office, that is such a blessing to an elected official, because that's one less thing they kind of have to micromanage or delegate. Somebody's taking that for them, and that's huge for us.
Well, and I've known most of your staff over the years, and you've done a great job picking them, and they've done a great job both serving you and your district. So kudos to you on picking some good principled people. So as we're closing out, just give me the last piece of advice. If you could just kind of have a flashback in time moment, going to yourself in 2009, what would you tell yourself to do differently or affirm, going back to that time?
Yeah, I think I would just tell you, give yourself the freedom to fail. And don't be discouraged at the end result, because you never know. Again, as a believer, as a Christian, I feel like there's a purpose for everything. And so my purpose in running in 2010 obviously wasn't to win. But if I hadn't run in 2010, I wouldn't have built up that kind of that base or done the groundwork for the run in 2012, which was successful. So don't be scared about the process. Give yourself the freedom to fail, and then know no matter what happens on Election Day, you've given a valuable contribution to society. You've done a good work for your community just by being invested and involved in the process. And whether you win or lose on Election Day does not measure your success as a candidate. It's if you stayed true to yourself, if you stayed true to your principles, then you'll never know what the next thing around the bend is. You just have to be open for it, look forward to working towards it. So give yourself the freedom to fail, and don't get wrapped up in the end results. Just know it's part of a longer process.
Very good piece of advice. Now, where can folks find you online?
Yeah, mattkrause.org is our website. You can also find us on Facebook. Find us at Twitter at Rep Matt Krause. And I'd love for you to follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, sign up for our email alerts on our website, and stay in touch with us. And look forward to hopefully doing more good work for the citizens of District 93 for a long time to come.
Well, Matt, I really appreciate you being on. Listeners, we'll have all those links to where you can find Matt online in the show notes, and we'll probably be hearing from Matt again sometime soon. Representative, we'll have to have you on and kind of talk a little more after the session's over, talking about what you've seen there and how people should handle that side of elected office.
Perfect. I'd love to do it. And thanks again for all your help in getting me here. It's not just saying that, it's sincere. And so the listeners out there, this guy knows what he's talking about. He's helped me now for 7 years. And so it's always good talking with you.
Well, it's a pleasure talking with you as well. And best of luck to you in the coming session.
Thanks, buddy. God bless you.
God bless you too. All right, guys, we'll catch you guys next week on the next episode of the My Campaign Coach podcast. Don't forget to look at the show notes and reach out to Representative Krause if you got any questions.
Please subscribe and rate us on iTunes to help spread the word. We'll be back with you next week with more campaign insights from My Campaign Coach.